I guess I'm the same as Deb, kind of a fish out of water no matter where we go, because the ritual abuse is so horrific and it's so much different than, the kind of, I don't know what you call regular abuse. I mean, there's no abuse that's good. And of course, everybody's story, everybody's pain is their own. But for me, I think my main focus has always been, as soon as I started remembering this, was like, holy crap, they're still doing this to other people. And that's kind of been the focus of, I don't know if I would have made it through without that. If it would have all just been about me, and I'm going to do this and that, I don't think that would have been enough motivation to keep me going. But I've written a bunch of stuff, but I'm an idiot with a computer. I don't know, like I know it's not rocket science where you can scan things in and then put them on a website and start that stuff up. I don't know how to do any of that. So that's kind of, and it's interesting, the self-sabotaging mechanisms that are always going on, because I've tried to look for that kind of help, like at community colleges, or to find some computer nerd that would be willing to do that for money. And it seems like I either can't follow up, or the communication gets messed up, or I call it gremlins. There's always gremlins messing around in the mix. But basically, I think ritual abuse kind of needs to be demystified, because all they do is they add a bunch of violent theater to the rape to confuse a kid. I mean, that's the bottom line. They're wearing devil masks and, drugging, like the drugs, it was always heavy doses of sedatives and hallucinogens. And in my case, for my research, I think it was Valium and belladonna. So you're drugged down with the sedatives, so you can't really fight back. And then the hallucinogens make all the devil masks and everything seem real. And you can imagine, to a 6-year-old child, the horror and the fear is just, I mean, through the roof. You guys are familiar with dissociation, I'm sure. That's where it all comes from. I mean, people don't realize, if you ever think about how easy it is to terrify a 6-year-old child or an 8-year-old child. And these people are experts at it. So basically, they rape kids, but they add these elements, and it's always extreme violence, extreme deception, and then mind and memory altering drugs. And when you integrate all that stuff into the rape, and they're wearing costumes and they're praying to the devil and they're actually vivisecting live animals, which is the most horrific thing you could possibly do with a kid, that's what ends up being called ritual abuse. And then from my perspective, the religious element's all a smokescreen. They kind of add that in just to make it so unbelievable, and so it's so out of left field from the ordinary reality that we know about. People can't wrap their heads around it. And that's how they've been getting away with it forever. In my research of this, it goes back at least to the time of Caligula, the Roman Empire, and probably before that, probably back to the time of the pyramids. And it even goes back, like I study shamanism, and the shaman, their rituals always involve masks and trance and altered states of mind and using different drugs. But it wasn't to rape kids. It was to get in touch with the spirits of the animals, the spirits of the trees, whatever. So there's a long history of human beings having these abilities and the knowledge of how to do this. And like I say, from the Roman Empire on, these certain groups used it for their very nefarious purposes. And ultimately I really think ultimately it's just to rape kids. And all the rest of it is all this bullshit that they wrap around it so they can feel important. They're doing it to gain power and to get in touch with the devil or whatever that nonsense is. But it's just for their own egos or whatever, so they can feel like what they're doing is important and meaningful besides just raping little kids. But that's the bottom line in it. So that was my approach from the reports that I've written, and I think I did a pretty good job writing and demystifying all this stuff and making it intelligible. But I also think that's why there's been a lot of roadblocks thrown in front of me, because the one thing I've learned is, like, some of us that were ritually abused, it was like part of an experiment or whatever. They've kind of kept their eye on a few of us. They didn't put people through all this and then send them out and forget about them, because I could become a very credible witness to what these things are doing, and they don't want that. So even in my family, you know, as long as I'm just crazy Jimmy with some weird ideas, I'm no threat. I can say anything I want. But if I put together a package that's very intelligently put together, very believable, you know, it appeals to your heart, et cetera, that makes me credible, and that makes me a threat. And I don't mean just me, I mean, because I'm in touch with a lot of other survivors besides in SNAP. And there's, well, I think I told Debbie this story. I'm just kind of rambling right now, but that SNAP meeting, when I finally was able to stand up and talk about the ritual abuse, and because, you know, before I would start shaking and stammering, and, you know, because it went on for 10 years. So I finally got enough healing where I was able to talk about it credibly. I got a few phone numbers, and my plan was to start, you know, moving forward with trying to educate the public in some way. And the next day, Monday, we got home, me and Debbie, and we got zapped with some kind of electronic weaponry. There's no doubt in my mind, it wasn't something we made up. We weren't thinking about it, and all of a sudden it like swept right through the kitchen. We both felt it at the same time. We both got deathly ill. The dogs got sick. I ended up taking Deb to the hospital. Her heart rate went down to, like, I think 40, and blood pressure went up, and I was sick. And that was so, I mean, it's kind of weird because you can't really describe that kind of pain because it's not natural. There's nothing to compare it to. But it was so painful in the way it was painful that it did what it was supposed to, because we were so preoccupied with trying to get over that and get better and feel better, that the whole momentum I had going, which took so much effort to get there because of the PTSD, that just got blown away. And that was what, Debbie, 3 years ago or 4 years? I don't know how long ago that was.
That was what, that first meeting we met?
Yeah, the ponytail, because wasn't that when I stood up and I was asking questions, and I got a phone number from a couple of the guys there, and yeah. So, and then, so that's where I'm at now, and now Debbie's had passed away. That's another thing going on, which again is, you know, it doesn't sound credible, but it's true. When all this 5G stuff started, they put 2 big poles at both ends of our block. Our house is right in the middle, and all of a sudden we were being inundated with that stuff day in and day out inside the house. Couldn't get away from it. It was making us both sick. It took 5 months to get out of there. And by the end of that 5 months, Debbie's cancer had gone through the roof. My lung cancer is all getting bad now. And again, whether that's direct or indirect, I don't know. But that's another thing that got in the way. We had something going. We had a little forward momentum going. And then that just knocked us both out of the water. And then now Debbie's gone. I'll start crying if I talk about it too much. So it's a real thing. It really happens. It's organized crime. And like any organized criminals, they don't want to get caught. And my assessment is they can't have thousands of dead altar boys strewn around the country, because people will start to wonder what the hell is going on. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to kill us. Instead of killing, they intimidate, harass. In my report, I got about 10 different words. I can't remember them right now. All the different ways they have to, and what it always comes down to is to neutralize the witness and to gain control of the victim. Those are both the same people, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone who's Everyone who's a victim of any kind of assault is also a witness to that assault. And if you're going to rape a child and then send them out into the world, you don't have control over them. There's things you have to do to that child to make sure they're not going to talk. If they do talk, they won't be believed. That's what the ritual abuse is all about, from my perspective. So the details, my report, I have the details. It's not pornographic, but it's very detailed of how they went about doing this. Just because I felt like somebody has to write it. Somebody has to write, this is what actually goes on in those rituals. I guess I can mention a couple things. Like I said, they vivisized live animals, tied them back, their paws back, belly up. They had pins through the ears holding their heads back. And then they forced us to cut these animals open while they were still alive, from stem to stern. And the screeching of these animals while this was going on, the horrificness, and you imagine a 6-year-old child doing this, the guilt, you can't even imagine. But that's when my first really bad dissociation started, because you just go away. Your spirit leaves as far as it can away from that crap. So that was one of the mainstays, was vivisizing the animals. And then unfortunately, once we got older, we graduated from animals to babies. And I only remember one, and I don't remember me being the one that cut it open. I remember the priest doing it. But this, I assume it was a pregnant nun, because she looked she didn't have her habit on or anything. They brought her in and laid her on a cot. She wasn't tied down. She could have got up and ran, but she didn't. That's how much power they had over her. Where could she go? It was in the basement of the rectory is where most of this stuff happened. They gave her a cesarean section. Well, I'll tell you the whole thing. The doctor, whoever did it, his back was to me. I never saw his face. They cut her open and pulled the baby out. She was screaming and wailing. While the cord was still attached to that baby, they vivisized this baby the same way we had done to the animals. And while the mother was watching and wailing, again, the horror of this and the sound of that mother, because I don't remember the baby, the mom was screaming way too loud. The dissociation took me to another dimension. I can't even explain it. It's so horrific. And that was the worst. So I will say that was the absolute worst thing that I remember in all the rituals. Bad enough. But my assessment of this, I couldn't possibly have been the only one, because these rituals were very sophisticated. They'd been done before, and it's hard to explain, but the feeling I had, some of this stuff was very ancient. Even some of the masks they used were like old wooden masks that had been around for a long time. Like they used them and preserved them because it gathered that energy, that evil energy into the mask. But, the point I was making was, I am quite sure that mental hospitals are full of people who, if they got the right treatment, would be eyewitnesses to this type of horrific abuse. And, there's a whole area of psychology called the trauma model. And mental illness is generally caused from trauma, and that's accurate. The other stuff is not accurate. So I'm not sure where I'm going, but that's what it was. So they started when I was 3 years old. Oh, this is another thing. They brought my mother into these things, and they forced me to have oral sex on my own mother when I was 3 years old. Again, the report goes into a little more detail of how they brought her in the room. And I still get nervous when I talk about this, because it's so, it's funny, it's so horrific, but what I'm feeling is that embarrassment, that sexual embarrassment is the more powerful even right now than the horrific part. But when she was brought into the room, her eyes were glassy and she was just staring straight ahead. She was like a robot. If they moved her somewhere, she'd move there. If they let her go, she'd just stay there. So she'd been heavily sedated. And then from that state, you know, they laid her down and they spread eagled her. And then the nuns saying things like, do you love your mommy? This is how you're supposed to love mommy. Love your mommy. And, you know, they gave me instructions on how to do what I was doing orally. And, you know, I get smacked if I didn't do things right. And so that, I mean, I was 3. That was the first. And the way I know I was 3, like I can remember my mind, I was older than 2. I don't know if you can remember being a kid. I know I was older than 2, but it was younger than 4. I wasn't quite there yet. So it had to be 3. But I mean, the confusion and everything for a little boy is just beyond anything. And plus I was drugged. I don't think I was drugged really heavy that time. The older we got, the more heavily they drug us. But then once I was done practicing on her, then they made me do the same thing to them. And there was one nun that got me a couple more times after that, and then we moved to a different parish. So I don't know. Is this what you were expecting to hear? I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be talking about.
You're doing
You're doing great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Like I said, the report has a good timeline and it's much more, you know, logically stated and everything. But I guess one other thing I can mention, and this is actually a cliche among the Satanists. It's been going on for years and they make references to it in some of the records and everything else. But they wear a devil mask over their hips. It's strapped around the hips, and where the devil's nose would be, that's where the priest's penis protrudes. And so, and of course, the mask is very terrifying looking. You can, like, if you ever gone into a Halloween shop, some of those masks are pretty horrible looking. So they have that on. And then the kid is drugged, of course, so you think it's real. And then while you're orally engaging this priest, there's that devil mask right in front of your face, you know, staring right into your eyes, and it's coming closer and further and closer and further. And it just puts you in this hypnotic trance. But it's 100% of a fear trance. It's a negative hypnotic trance. And that's also very common. There's millions of Satanists out there that know how to do this. They do it all the time. But that was when I was 6 was the first time they got me with that. And then the way the rituals usually worked, so I was 3 the first time they got me. They only got me a couple more times after that because I wasn't in the school yet. So it was only on Sunday when they could, you know, I think they convinced my folks, oh, it's a special thing for the kids, and they take all the kids to whatever, catechism or to get lollipops or something, and then they separated the ones they were raping. And my impression is there was only a couple of us. That's the other way they get away with it. They only do, at any given time, probably 1% of the kids, which is still a lot of kids, but if 99% don't know anything about it, the 1% are always going to seem like they're wacky when they try and talk about this stuff. And now I forget where I was going with that.
I think you were saying it was a couple times when you were 3.
Oh
and
yeah,
then
that's
went to
right.
Another parish.
Right, yeah, and so I wasn't in the school yet, so they only got me a couple times between 3 and 6. In my kindergarten year, I went to public school, so I didn't have any of those problems. Then in the Catholic school, what happened is they'd have one very elaborate ritual, maybe the first couple of weeks of school, and that would just bring you back into that dissociative state, and they would set up all the hypnotic symbols. So then the rest of the year, all the priest would have to do is, well, one priest would always put a wig on. He'd put this certain wig on and shake his head, and then I have no memory after that. And then I'd be home late. How come you're home late? I don't know what I was doing. And usually it was just they take you in the bathroom. But that was the whole point. As soon as they hit you with those cues, you go right back into that dissociative state, completely robotized, completely in fear, and they could do whatever they want. And then that was their sex life. So the beginning of the year was the big rituals. That would bring us back into the fold, and they'd rape us in the bathroom, whatever, once a week, however much they wanted to do it. And then in the summer, I don't think they access us much in the summer because I really don't have a lot of like any bad feelings or flashbacks with summertime. But the beginning of the school year, every year, even now, I'm 67. I'm a mess. I mean, I'm really a mess. And so that was, now it's interesting too, because I've always known that part of what they were doing was experimenting. There was an aspect of this that had to do with experimenting on how to control people, how to, create division. That was the big thing, was to create division within the person. I guess they call it bipolarity. Mine is called polyfragmentation. I don't know if you know about this. I've never been DID. As far as I know, I've never had any lost time or anything. So there's other people that went through even worse than me, which I can't even imagine. Well, I know a lot of people that went through this with their own parents, and I think I can't even fathom how you could ever get over that. I mean, and those are the ones that are really messed up. Those are the ones that are DID, I just feel so much compassion for those people because I see them in my Facebook groups, and you read it and like, I don't have any words of wisdom. I don't know. What can you say? You just give compassion to these people, but without, it would take a team of people. It would take $500,000 to actually cure, but to bring somebody that wants to do that back into some kind of a normal state of happiness. So, but anyway, that's what I was getting back to. They were experiments. And from my perspective, the experiments were how to split the whole in two conflicting parts, right? Divide and conquer. And I swear I've seen this gone from the ritual kids, and then it expands out into the whole country, expands out into the world with the way the propaganda is being used. And it's all divide and conquer. Even I don't know how much you know or are into the alternative media and all that. Most of that's even controlled. It's all set up so it's us against them, brother against brother, very much on purpose. And what I see is the same kind of tactics that they used on us being used in the general population. So I don't know how much water that holds, but it sure seems that way to me. And then I have some other friends now that have been studying the, what is that called? MK Ultra. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And they're telling me that everything that I've been telling them about goes right along with the MK Ultra stuff. So maybe that's part of it. Because I do know there's parts of my mind that have been opened up where I understand things like about physics, things that seem so obvious to me, and I can't get anyone else to even want to read it or talk about it. It's like, so there's that going on. I'm losing my breath. Excuse me.
Sure.
Might take me a second.
Take your time.
Okay. But I've written actually 4 things that I hope to finally somehow get them out on the internet and get them in a situation where somebody could go on the site, and if they wanted to print them out, they could print them out and have them. And then once that was there, I could go on social media and just, pop things in, like all over YouTube, all the free energy things. I could say, hey, I got this, blah, 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 and look here. But I don't like just talking about problem without also offering a solution. So I have a poem I wrote, that took me 8 years. And that poem, the first half is a problem and the second half is kind of the solution. I mean, and then there's a couple other things. One is called Principles of Sexual Compassion Therapy, which again, it's not anything you're ever going to find in psychology today or any of the pop culture stuff, but it would actually be effective. It's a really good idea. And then another one, which is a weight loss video, but it's still connected with all this, because my perspective is these things are using their methods for a very positive outcome. The methods of repetition and, going back into your earlier childhood things to renegotiate the events and blah, blah, blah. Oh,